Daf Yomi. Tractate Bava Batra, page 86. A, top of the page. With the words Perkan Ichnisan Lesoich Beisai Pasagat Shaloi Modand. But in a case where he unloaded the merchandise from them and brought them into his house, Pasak ad Shaloi Modand Ein Shnehen Yechoy Lelachsal Boy Modand ad Shaloi Pasak Shnehen Yechoy Lelachsal Bohem Mid Chiloi Chilia B'Demachan B'Reshus Lokeach Lo Yekona Kilioid Lokeach Nami B'Reshus Mochel Lekona. But in a case where he unloaded the merchandise from them and brought them into his house, if he fixed the price before he measured the merchandise, both parties are no longer able to renege on the sale. If he measured the merchandise before fixing the price, both of them are able to renege on the sale. The Gemara comments, and from the fact that the vessels of the seller, when in the domain of the buyer, do not affect acquisition of the merchandise for the seller, meaning they do not prevent the buyer from acquiring the merchandise, one can derive that the vessels of the buyer in the domain of the seller do not affect acquisition of the merchandise on his behalf as well. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Beshesh Fachan Ikpad Rava Mide Shafachan Ketani Pe'arkan Ketani Ela Amar Mar Baravashi B'mit Achkele de Tume. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, the merchandise was not placed in the domain of the buyer in vessels belonging to the seller. Rather, the Batra is referring to a case where he emptied the vessels onto the ground. Conversely, if the merchandise remains in the seller's vessels, the buyer is then acquired. Rava became angry with Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak as rejection of Rava's proof and retorted, does the Batra teach he emptied them? No, it teaches he unloaded them, meaning he kept the goods in vessels belonging to the seller. Rather, Mar Baravashi says, this proof can be rejected by means of a different interpretation, as the halacha of the Batra does not refer to vessels full of goods, but is stated with regard to bundles of garlic that were tied together. Therefore, they are unloaded straight onto the floor in the buyer's domain. Amar Rav Huna B'rei Demar Zutra Leravina Mechti Perkan Ketani Mali Pasak Mali Lo Pasak Amar Le Pasak Samcha Daite Lo Pasak Lo Samcha Daite. With regard to the matter itself, Huna, son of Mar Zutra, said to Ravina, since the Batra teaches he unloaded them, which indicates that unloading the merchandise constitutes the act of acquisition, what difference is there to me if he fixed the price, and what difference is there to me if he did not fix the price? Ravina said to him, if he fixed the price, he has made up his mind to sell, and therefore the transaction can take place. If he did not fix the price, he has not made up his mind to sell, and the transaction does not occur. In any event, no convincing proof has been found with regard to the halacha in a case where the vessels of the buyer are in the domain of the seller. Amar le Ravina Rav Ashi. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, Tashima, come here, proof of advice of Shmuel Amar Travayu, the Rav Ushmuel Amar Travayu Kilio, Shadim Konelo. Bechol Makom Leasei Mai Lo Leasei Rishus Moecher Asam Amar Le Zilkani. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, come here a resolution, as Rav and Shmuel both say a person's vessel affects acquisition for him of any item placed inside it in any place that is situated. What is added by the phrase in any place? Does it not serve to add the domain of the seller? Rav Ashi answered, there is referring to a specific case where the seller said to him, go and acquire it. In that situation, the buyer does acquire the merchandise. This does not refer to a standard case where the buyer's vessels are located in the domain of the seller. Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah elsewhere in Kedushin 26a. Nechasim sheyesh lohen achayus, property that is guaranteed, meaning land is acquired by means of money, or by means of a bill, or by taking possession of it. The property that does not have a guarantee. Okay, so property that is guaranteed can be acquired only by means of pulling. Property that is guaranteed, or by means of, and property that does not have a guarantee, either one can only be acquired by means of pulling. Okay. Nechasim sheyesh lemachrayas niktin b'kesef shar v'chazaka v'she'en lehem machrayas ein niktin el b'mashicha. Oh, if it's acquired by money, property that's guaranteed is acquired by money or by bill or by possession. That's what property that's guaranteed is money or bill or possession, but as not a guarantee is only acquired through pulling. Okay. Right. Pesura masni lo shmaita mishmid rav chizda. Bepum belisa masnu lei mishmid rav gana v'amri lei mishmid rav lo yishanu el devarim shi darkan lagbia av b'dor shi darkan av devarim shi darkan lagbia v'hagba and mashichalo. Okay. In Surah they taught this following halacha in the name of Rav Chizda, while in Pumbedita they taught it in the name of Rav Kahana, and some say in the name of Rava. They taught that a movable property is acquired by means of pulling only with regard to items that are not typically lifted due to their weight or for some other reason. But in the case of items that are typically lifted, then yes, they are acquired by means of lifting, but they are not acquired by means of pulling. Yesav by the Kamar Lahashmaita is favor of Ada Baramastin and Abaye. Hagoin in Kis Bashavas Chayav. She covered this Chayav Miganeva Kodim Shiavo Ide Isur Shabbat. Abaye sat and related this halacha. Rav Ada Bar Matana raised an objection to Abaye from a Braita. One who steals a purse on Shabbat is liable for theft, based on the principle that one who is liable to receive two punishments receives only the greater of the two. In this case, one might think that he should be exempt from paying the theft, as the performance of prohibited labor on Shabbat is punishable by death. The reason is he is liable in this case. An apparent contradiction to that principle is that he already became liable for theft as soon as he lifted the purse. This occurred before he came to violate the prohibition of performing prohibited labor on Shabbat by carrying the purse into the public domain. Haya Migarer Yotzi Pater Shoya Isur Shabas Ugneva Be'en Kechad. The verse continues, if he did not lift the purse, but was dragging it out of the ground and exiting the private domain, continuously dragging and exiting, he is exempt on the prohibition of performing labor on Shabbat, and the prohibition of theft are violated simultaneously the moment he drags the purse out of the owner's property into the public domain. Therefore, he receives only the greater punishment, death, for carrying on Shabbat. V'harei kis davar hagbahu afilu hachi ketani meshicha amar le b'misna ananami misna ka amina amar le b'mida devoy kamista. Rav Ada Bar Matana explains his objection, but a purse is an item that can be lifted, and even so, it is apparent from the Braita that one acquires it by means of pulling. How then can it be stated that items that are typically lifted are not acquired by pulling? Abaye said to him, the Braita is referring to a case where the thief pulled the purse with a rope. And Ada Bar Matana thought that Abaye meant that the thief happened to drag it with a rope. He responded, I also state my opinion. Question, even in a case where he pulled the purse with a rope, as it is still evidence that one can acquire the purse by means of pulling instead of lifting. Abaye said to him, I mean that the Braita is referring to an item that requires a rope. It is a purpose that it is so large that it cannot be lifted and must be pulled Therefore, it is acquired by means of pulling. Tashima, a proof from Raisa. Gemara raised an objection. Rishus Machel Mena Oishiyats and Rishuso Alma Miade Davar Hagvia I Boy Bagvia Kane Ika Boy Mishicha Kane Late or Nachmaria Sok Litzadan Akatani Miade Dagba Behagba Mide Mishicha. Gemara raises another objection. Come in here. If the merchandise is in the domain of the seller, the buyer does not acquire the merchandise until he lifts it or until he removes it from the domain of the seller. Apparently, with regard to an item that can be lifted, if he so desires, he acquires by lifting. As he so desires, he acquires by pulling. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, this is not a proof, as it can be explained that the Tana teaches it disjunctively. In other words, the two options are referring to two different cases. In the case of an item that can be lifted, he acquires by lifting, whereas with regard to an item that can be lifted, he acquires it by pulling.